On behalf of Think Big Partners, I'm Herb C. with my co-host Sarah Fustini with Think Big Partners. We apologize for the audio issues here, but hopefully we have resolved them at this point. As a reminder, if you are on the program, if you could please mute your microphones, that will minimize the background noise as well. Our presentation today is going to be 50 minutes. This should cover a lot of the information regarding public-private partnerships. And today, more than ever before, we're finding that these are extremely important. We are going to cover a lot of ground during this presentation. We're going to try and take a very complex subject and make it very simple. And then lastly, at the end, we're going to go ahead and leave time for questions and answers. If you want to use the tool on WebEx to answer or ask your questions, please submit them. What we're going to try and do is round them all up, and if they have a high correlation to each other, we're going to go ahead and make sure that we're able to address them and also try and organize them in a logical way. Lastly, if you are unable to ask a question or we did not answer something that you would like to have answered, please feel free to email us at info@thinkbigpartners.com. While we may not be able to get to it on today's call, we will certainly be more than happy to be able to address it in a future session. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So first of all, before we can do that, if you can look at Think Big Partners, it's important for us to be able to help explain where we came from for the purpose of today's discussion. Think Big Partners really was born in 2009. It came out of the incubator and accelerator space, and we've been working with technology, innovation, entrepreneurship really since 2009 and even prior to that. But our background really began in the public-private partnership space as we were one of the original visionaries and co-creators of Kansas City's Smart and Connected City project. That is a public-private partnership between Kansas City, Cisco, Think Big Partners, Sprint, Smart City Media, and a number of other companies that were really essential in creating this visionary plan and activating it, with ultimately it becoming live in 2016 in a public-private partnership. More than 20 projects later, we've developed an expertise globally, working with cities all across the country, Canada, and overseas, and helping them create everything from innovation centers to smart city master planning. But really in every community that we work in, we've seen public-private partnerships take on a bigger role more than ever before. And based on the Kansas City project in 2017, we were very proud to be part of a team that won the Golden Edison Award for the Smart City project. So based on that, first of all, why don't we define what a smart city is before we get into the public-private partnership realm. Smart cities, for a lot of people, they really look at the sensorization or the technology impact of beacons and sensors and data connectivity layer working in the smart city space. We really look at it through a couple additional lenses. Smart cities are really about using technology, data, and information really to be able to help the most important asset of every city, and that's the citizens. The citizens are really the ultimate beneficiary, and if you really look at what technology can do, it is an economic development tool designed to be able to reduce cost, modernize infrastructure, increase the livability of a live, work, play environment. We want to make sure that the quality of life for citizens universally is improved, not just one segment, but smart cities is really about taking the technology and being able to really make more of it. So with that, why are smart cities so important today, and why are public-private partnerships so important today? Well, today I woke up and as chance would have it, there was a lot of news, but on today's top NPR story, this was the #3 news item, and I'm just going to play this here for you, and hopefully you can hear this.
Expect more potholes and traffic jams on the nation's highways if there isn't a significant investment soon to upgrade the system. That, according to a new federal report released today on the future of the interstate highway system. Here's NPR's David Schaefer.
After its creation in 1956, the interstate highway system quickly became the backbone of the nation's economy. But today it is overused and worn out, according to the new study, and, quote, threatened by a persistent and growing backlog of structural and operational deficiencies. More than a third of interstate highway bridges are more than 50 years old and need to be repaired or replaced. Technological upgrades are needed to accommodate electric and autonomous vehicles, and the system needs to be made more resilient to withstand threats from climate change. Modernizing interstate highways will cost an additional $20 to $50 billion a year, according to the report. The authors recommend raising the federal gas tax and increased tolling to pay for it. David Schaefer, NPR News.
So based on that, if you got to look at the amount of bridges that are decaying in the United States, if you look at the technology infrastructure that's required to be able to power the next generation of autonomous vehicles, you may have heard that as part of this. 5G is one of the most important assets that every city has that we're sitting on top of it, but a lot of the public partnerships that we have today aren't just being limited to technology and infrastructure assets. Really the challenges that cities face today really stems from the fact that you've got urbanization that's occurring across every major city in the United States. If you look at today, 54.5% of the world's population lives in cities, and by 2050, that's supposed to grow to 70% of the world's population. In fact, in the United States, the fastest growing cities last year, 3 of them were in Texas of the top 15, and those cities are going to double their population here in the next 8 years. So one of the questions that we would have for you is, if your city were to double in population in the next 8 years, how are you going to handle that? And more importantly, who's going to pay for that? That's why the public-private partnership discussion is so important today. In fact, if you look at procurement historically in the cities, procurement is a very, very, very rigid system that needs to change. And what we are telling cities today is that you cannot use the same thinking that was used to create the problems in order to be able to solve them. We have got to be able to change how we look, and the public-private partnerships today in the modern age is one of the methods that we see as that. So what is a public-private partnership? Well, if you look at a public-private partnership, the opportunity to be able to take a city or a private sector company, or if you can look at even the citizens or academia, all of these have been creating public-private partnerships for years, but in the realm of today's discussion, the public-private partnership really includes a number of entities. It involves a city that has aging infrastructure, or maybe they have an opportunity to be able to unlock innovation. It may be oriented towards an innovation district, or perhaps it's going to be oriented towards solving a very specific problem. Regardless of what the city is trying to accomplish, the public-private partnership really has 3 main components. You have the beneficiary, which is a city. You have a technology or asset provider, which is going to then contribute something of value to the city to be able to solve the problems. And then you have the financier. The financial elements of a public-private partnership require a city to be able to discharge the financial risk while still enjoying the benefits of these assets. So why is it so important now? If you were to look at the current state of public-private partnerships in the cities today, only 16% of the cities that were surveyed recently are able to actually self-fund infrastructure projects that are required to be able to bring their city into the state that they would like. If you listened to the NPR news release, if you look at the number of bridges and roads as essential infrastructure, that is the beginning point of this. But if you go beyond that, if you start looking at the opportunity to modernize buildings, if you look at the cost savings that can be achieved from modernization of building envelopes, if you look at the other opportunities to be able to make money and save money and increase the quality of life, really the need for public-private partnerships to be able to take on these multi-billion-dollar projects today is more important than ever before. There are multiple types of public-private partnerships. Public-private partnerships have historically been defined as contracts that are very, very, very important to the cities, and so much so that they are governed by a lot of the procurement models. There are also informal public-private partnerships that we will talk about today, and then there are hybrids. The hybrids exist outside of the procurement realm, oftentimes that are contracts on a very specific asset or a problem for these cities to be able to look at finding a solution to something that's of very specific interest. The hybrid model that we're going to look at today is going to cover a lot of the ground. The last public-private partnership that we also want to remind the cities that are on this call today is that this is also a contract with the stakeholders of your city, the people. We've seen a lot of increase in citizen engagement workshops. If you look at what's going on across the country or even across the world, as an example, up in Toronto. Toronto is a very good high-growth city. They have very ambitious plans to be able to deliver a lot of city services to the audiences that live up there. But even the public-private partnership realm that is void of a dialogue with the consumer, with the citizens, is fraught with peril. The inability to be able to have a consumer engaged in the conversation, to be able to help co-create the city that they're living in, is a challenge. So the public-private partnership realm that we would suggest is not just about the P3 model, but it's actually a P4 model. It includes the private citizens as well. On the page in front of you, you're going to see typically some of the assets that are part of the public-private partnerships. These assets look a lot like the ones that you'd expect. You've got LED lights, you've got building infrastructure, you've got bridges, you've got different things that are of a lot of interest to different cities. But some of the most compelling opportunities today exist in assets that are not going to be readily understood by some of the partners. On this call today, we're going to examine one of these assets as really a starting point. The streetlight is really a good starting point for many of the cities on these public-private partnerships. If you look at the opportunity for cities to be able to modernize infrastructure with 5G, create multi-sensor nodes that can improve safety, or if they can actually take a look at modernizing a city to be able to bring in workforce development opportunities by attracting companies and creating these innovation districts, the streetlight is one of the most important key pieces to this. The streetlight, though, if you were to break this down, is a solution to many different problems. The first problem that we're going to solve with the streetlight, obviously, is going to be differentiated lighting equals more energy savings. What does this mean? The average public-private partnership, when you look at these performance-based contracting models, is really going to be based on the energy savings that's derived from replacing high-pressure sodium lights with these LED lighting systems. Out of the box, typically you can expect to see a 60 to 70% cost savings, to where a lot of these public-private partnerships are really going to use those cost savings to be able to finance other assets. But this is just the beginning of this. To be able to build a strong public-private partnership, you've got to be able to identify all the different assets that are going to be important to a city. So breaking down this streetlight as an example, if you look at the cost savings to be able to fuel a lot of the other investments, the next asset that we're going to look at on top of the streetlight are sensors. These sensors often connect to the PoE switch ports or the NEMA sockets, which are located in this case on top of the streetlight. For the public-private partnerships to exist, you've got to be able to find multiple parties that will see a benefit from the assets that you are bringing to the table. In this case, the multi-sensor node could be everything from an optical sensor. It could be an environmental sensor that's detecting humidity or temperature. It could be a sensor that is detecting vehicle movement, which is going to allow for traffic signal synchronization. It could be a sensor that is counting people, which is important for market data, for market planning, for real estate developers if they're trying to find a real estate district that's worth investing in. But if you look at the public-private partnership, this light has the ability to be able to bring in multiple parties very quickly into a P3 model that can be very fruitful. The next thing that a lot of the P3s that we're seeing today that are very strong are hanging rights. The hanging rights are typically going to be of interest to companies, the service providers, and just to give a few names, but this is not an all-exhaustive list, but the companies like Verizon, AT&T, you may have Sprint in there or T-Mobile. You may also have companies like Cox or CenturyLink that are interested in being able to create a backhaul or small cell densification model that allows you to be able to put more signals and antenna arrays on top of these streetlights. Why is that important? As you heard in the NPR article, you've got aging infrastructure, you have the autonomous vehicles that were coming, and the ability to be able to create a 5G environment to be able to have vehicle-to-vehicle or vehicle-to-infrastructure communications is essential. The P3 models that we are seeing allow you to be able to coincide both 5G and also optical sensors to be able to do things like passenger counting or people counting or traffic counting, and put those all together on top of this dumb LED light. And then lastly, you've got other folks that are very interested in other assets in a public-private partnership. The pole rights and the easement rights are also very important because it allows you to be able to put other sensors, and it's a prime location that allows you to be able to pull power into a secure location and be able to have other things that are very important to public-private partnerships. So for us to be able to go look at this, why don't we take a look at a few case studies that are very specific in public-private partnerships. We're going to break them down, and then we're going to go ahead and give you a lot of information about what we are seeing in public-private partnerships today. In Kansas City, which is where we're located, we're going to go ahead and revisit there as the beginning point for a public-private partnership. As a reminder, this was a $15.7 million public-private partnership. Kansas City chose to go down the road of being able to find the private sector to be able to come to the table instead of trying to float a bond or do some type of financing structure. Kansas City did not issue an RFP. This was not a sole source situation either. What this was a combination of different thought processes of partners coming together to be able to circle around problems inside of a city, be able to create a financial solution on top of a technology solution, and finally bringing it to bear. In Kansas City, you can look at the first icon in the upper left-hand corner of the lights. Just to be able to give a specific asset name, Sensity provided the lights, and that light was really the beginning of the LED cost savings. So again, out of the box, as a reminder, 60 to 70% of the energy savings can be achieved right out of the box, and that typically can go up to 80 to 90% as the light becomes smarter through artificial intelligence, machine learning, computer vision, or just simply programming it to be able to take advantage of known events and conditions that you may be able to program. Maybe it's based on, full moon, or you've got times that the streets are going to be very full of people. You can create lighting situations based on this that are going to be able to achieve higher cost savings than just simply leaving these on at a lower energy burn rate. If you look at the Wi-Fi partnership above the streetcar, Sprint was able to create the Wi-Fi partnership, and the reason why the strong public-private partnership was created, Sprint at the time also had some other business goals. So in your city, as you're looking at your business goals, take a look at what the mission, vision, and goals is. It may be about urbanization. It may be about attracting businesses. Perhaps you have a real estate market that you're trying to develop out, and be able to do so, you have to create additional demand for the real estate investment. The transit-oriented development that Kansas City was able to experience, along with the capital investment by the streetcar, was able to result in over $2 billion of real estate investment that's been on the books now since the project was launched in 2016. But the public Wi-Fi really has two roles. The public Wi-Fi from the standpoint of providing your next generation workforce, whether it's the millennial workforce that many cities are trying to attract, or you're trying to be able to use this as a public Wi-Fi to be able to create transit time that's more productive, or perhaps you're just living in downtown and you're wanting to be able to use the Wi-Fi as your own internet signal. But that public-private partnership mentality for that Wi-Fi signal is only half the story. The other side of that Wi-Fi signal is really be able to create the backhaul for the sensors and the beacons and the nodes that a lot of the P3 partners are looking to be able to try and capture. As an example, in Kansas City, the market planning that the real estate developers needed to be able to make informed decisions about where to make their next investment for a multifamily dwelling, perhaps it's a high-rise office building, but the ability to be able to bring in this data into a real-time environment so these folks can make informed business decisions about where to plant their flag and make the capital investment was really based on hard data. The public-private partnerships that are required to be able to make real estate developers, or you look at the energy savings companies that are capitalizing on the spend, or perhaps it's the transit-oriented development, which is a lot of times also another partnership component that we don't see. Being able to bring all these together is very important. In Kansas City, if you look to the far right on this slide, you'll notice that there's a picture of a kiosk. And what we like about this most, especially against the backdrop from this historical view, is that all of these assets have existed in every city. This is a very old picture in some respects of what the asset classes could look like relative to 2018 today. So there is no kiosk, but what was originally a sign or a billboard has now evolved into a digital kiosk, and that was part of a public-private partnership model as well. So in the case of Kansas City, 26 kiosks built by Smart City Media were placed. 24 of them were two-sided, 2 were one-sided, and the locations were identified primarily because of high traffic counts in the locations. So think about bus stops, think about grocery stores, think about entertainment venues like the Sprint Center. That's where these kiosks were placed. How is this part of a public-private partnership? Well, it was a strong public-private partnership when Smart City Media, along with their third-party private equity partners, was able to put the entire capital outlay into the Kansas City budget. And what Kansas City was able to enjoy was not only being able to not have to pay for any of these 26 kiosks, but also being able to take advantage of the revenue streams that would be generated by the advertising that was being put on these kiosks. Over time, these kiosks have seen millions of page views and the streetcar line, which is primarily where the kiosks were laid. The streetcar has had over 1 million riders in the first 9 months of operations on the 2.2-mile line in Kansas City. And over the course of the last couple of years beyond that, we're now over 3 million riders or so in Kansas City. The more riders, the more activity downtown, the more that the public-private partnership is working. The ability to be able to capture more information from people through the public Wi-Fi, obviously the energy savings from the lights, and being able to make sure that the advertising revenue is really important. A fourth piece to this is the parking piece. In Kansas City, we have, like many other cities, we have historically had ordinance to where it's a 3 per 1,000, which means for every 1,000 feet that a office space may have, you are required to have 3 parking spaces. But this is changing in Kansas City. The public-private partnership model allows us to be able to rethink the uses of parking. And so in many cities that we're seeing around the country, we're seeing the reduction in these parking spaces, which is really an opportunity to be able to get the real estate stakeholders to rethink how they're going to use the real estate. From a partnership standpoint, this is a much more productive asset class. So think about in your city, a parking space in Kansas City typically costs about $24,000 to $26,000 to be able to stripe one and build one. And if you think about the economics, it usually takes up to 20 to 22 years, at least in most cities, to be able to recapture the cost of that. It's not a high-performing financial asset. And if you're going to create a partnership in this P3 model, you want to be able to have the maximum benefit to every stakeholder. So for the stakeholders that are on the real estate side, to be able to create a more productive asset out of a parking space by reducing the parking space, by increasing public transit, and the public transit that is able to coincide between these different technology structures to include, again, autonomous vehicles that are coming, it's a really important piece to understand the partners inside of a smart city public-private partnership are not just the technology providers. They're the utility companies, which were the first to the game. They're the asset class providers like the LED lighting fixtures. They're the people providing the backbone technology, and they're even the real estate developers, the innovators, and the entrepreneurs too. If you look also at the very bottom, you've got water. Water is the blue gold. It's a universal asset to every city. But the ability to be able to even develop new water systems or new roads and bridges systems like the green icons that you can see there, those are very important. The ability to be able to put all this together with an innovation mindset is going to be important for these public-private partnerships to be able to capture the maximum value. This is the Kansas City public-private partnership model that we've been able to enjoy since 2016. With that, why don't we look at New York City next? New York City is a little bit different case study, and New York City really what we would call out is if you look at back in 2014 and 15, New York City had 8,400 public phones that over time had fewer and fewer users. And despite the fact that the pay phones had reduced usage, they were still generating substantial revenue for the city. And it was even more importantly identified as an asset that had intrinsic value for the future. So what New York City did in their public-private partnership is they decided to be able to look at how do you have a powered structure and how do you be able to take advantage of all the people. In fact, New York City in 2013, they had $17 million generated just from billboard traffic in the city itself. But over time, they were also recognizing that billboards in many cities, to include New York City, are having less and less of a favorable response by the citizens. And the most important device that most people can advertise on nowadays in these public-private partnerships is on the phone. The number of smartphone penetration is still increasing, but you're approaching now penetration rates in some urban areas as high as 85 to 90%, and in some of the rural areas or some of the less sophisticated areas, you're looking at 60 to 70%. So New York City was able to take their payphone booths, and through Link NYC, Titan Control Group, Qualcomm, and a number of other partnership folks, they were able to remediate these payphone booths that had the electrical power pulled in. They were able to put kiosks in that were provided by City Bridge, and then based on that, they were able to actually install these kiosks with an advertising system, which ultimately will produce hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. In fact, for a city to be able to find a new revenue stream, to be able to now apply to roads or bridges or lighting systems or building infrastructures, that's going to be very, very important. Between New York City and Kansas City, there are additional opportunities in the public-private partnership space. And so what we'd like to do is we'd like to be able to go through how we would begin looking at this and the essential elements of a good public-private partnership model. So number one, we're going to begin with the end. What does that mean? In the case of some cities like Kansas City was seeing a rebirth. We were able to look at the opportunity to be able to combine entrepreneurship and innovation along with an interest in becoming an 18-hour city that was really started by the beginning of an entertainment district. So in your city, if you can begin with the end of understanding your economic development goals, if you have goals that are economic development oriented, that's one lens to be able to look at it. In Kansas City, we were able to look at that also through the transportation lens when the streetcar system came online. The other areas, if you want to begin with the end, think about less obvious areas. You've got the opportunity to be able to look at alternative energy sources, energy savings, not just in the electrical energy savings, but if you look at solar as a very powerful opportunity, or if you look at natural gas, or if you look at other types of ways. In many cities, beginning with the end means that we can look at problems that exist. So let's say you have, as an example, a solid waste stream. A solid waste stream for some partners is going to be very, very important. High-strength waste often comes from different types of factory as an output, or it could come from certain types of conditions in a city. But regardless, solid waste streams is another way to begin with the end. Another opportunity is if you're looking for revitalization. If you're looking at revitalization as your endpoint, look at the opportunity to be able to understand who's going to benefit from the infrastructure, who are going to be some of the key stakeholders and players that are going to care about that. Some of the cities that we are seeing is able to identify partners that have emerging technology partners that are looking for what we're going to call lighthouse accounts. Opportunities to be able to capitalize on a high-profile city, to be able to demonstrate an innovation and be able to really put out there an opportunity to help revitalize structure while still being able to showcase an asset that they are trying to get out there in the market. Again, begin with the end, understand the problems that you're trying to solve. The second thing that we would encourage you on these public-private partnerships is look at the mission, vision, and goals. If we were to look at the city of Toronto, the city of Toronto has, like many other cities, is the top 10 city in North America. They face urbanization challenges, but if you look at the mayor for the mission, vision, and goals, they're very interested in attacking homelessness. They're very interested in being able to create better transportation. They're very interested in being able to create digital inclusion. And lastly, they're very interested in the urbanization challenges as that city also is growing very rapidly. But one of the different opportunities that we look at in mission, vision, and goals is that you may have long-term missions based on the city. You've got shorter-term visions based on the political administration. And then short-term, you may also have opportunities or goals to be able to respond to challenges. In the case of Toronto, Toronto had a Infrastructure Canada Challenge grant, which was really a opportunity throughout all of Canada to be able to win up to $50 million US, and that grant was really made available to cities. So if you can combine both the mission, vision, and goals, the current state of the environment, if you look at the political environment, if you look at the mission and the essential services you've got to deliver as a city, try and combine those with the specific problems and then the political overlay. The third thing that we would look at is look at the assets that you have to work with. For many of the cities, one of the biggest opportunities that we see today is in the 5G space. If you've done an LED lighting retrofit, or if you have replaced other types of assets recently, it doesn't mean that you are out of the 5G game. However, if you have not replaced high-pressure sodium lights, if you've got aging infrastructure that's in the urban core, you have a very, very attractive asset class. The 5G network model is really dependent upon a number of things. 4G, as a point of reference, 4G has a signal range of approximately 1.5 to 2 kilometers, and that really is a very, very good long range relative to 5G, which only has up to, in some cases, 500 meters. You also have a much more different scenario that 4G was laid out than 5G is coming into today. 4G, when it came out to market a few years ago, really the number of devices that it was connecting with was very limited. The number of devices, whether it be your phone, whether you think about the connected vehicle, or you think about the edge processors that are coming out in the Internet of Things devices, the devices are increasing exponentially. So one of the challenges that a lot of the cities have is how do we accommodate this tremendous growth? The 5G opportunity means that you have the necessity to be able to put antenna arrays every 500 meters, or in some cases 250 meters, or in some cases with a lot of different urban environments, as little as 100 meters. All of these assets that are these antenna arrays require a location. The ideal location for many of these 5G providers looks like a light pole. It can also exist on top of a building or other structures that have power, that have an unrestricted sight line, and have the ability to be able to have a very good access as they continue to add more things to that location. The 5G networks that we're seeing today, whether you're going straight with a single provider like Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, or T-Mobile, or for some other cities, the neutral host model. The neutral host model, if you're not familiar with it, is a public-private partnership with really a third party that is taking on the risk of developing out the different locations on behalf of the city. The ability to be able to place the antennas, operate the antennas, service the antennas, and really bring on new applications on top of the antennas is really then discharged to a third party. The third party, like other good public-private partnerships, also brings in financial capital. The capital providers are typically coming from private equity funds or perpetual funds. Think about things like insurance companies with alternative investment classes. But one of the most prominent parties that we're seeing today are the private equity partners. The private equity partners are very interested in light poles. They're interested in other alternative locations for 5G. So if you look back at your assets, some of the best assets that we are seeing could be light fixtures. It could be the solid waste streams. It could be transit-oriented development or an infrastructure. It could be raw, undeveloped ground that you have as a real estate class that is looking for new growth opportunities that's going to coincide with economic development planning. But that's some of the most prominent assets. Look at the assets you have to work with. Between those top three, the ability to put all those together into a roadmap to be able to figure out who to approach and how to approach really then leads to step number 4, understanding the P3 environment. The environment is changing very, very rapidly. But what you've got to understand is whether you are in a formal P3 model or an informal model or a hybrid model, there are multiple different components that you need to understand. First of all, if you're in a formal procurement model, at the very end of this presentation, we're going to show you a map, and there's a legislation that every state has got to abide by, and it limits the number of P3s, or the types of P3s, rather, they're able to engage in. But the informal P3s, the P3s that are working with, as an example, the private sector companies that are Fortune 100 technology companies like the Microsofts, the Oracles, the Ciscos, the Hitachis, the Siemens, those companies are seeking innovation partners. Oftentimes in this innovation environment or the public-private partnership environment, these companies are seeking a fertile ground to be able to capitalize on a high-growth trajectory of a city while advancing a technology solution. The advancement of these technology solutions often comes with most favorable conditions to include financial incentives, or they allow you to be able to create an identity as an innovation community. And if you were to look at the P3 environment that your community exists in today, historically look at some of the legacy businesses that you have in your community, look at how they're trying to reinvent themselves, and look at the opportunities for them to be able to take advantage of some of these large Fortune 100 companies and their innovation partnering opportunities. The P3 environment also includes the utility companies. The utility companies are going through a lot of different regulations. So between solar power and wind energy, those are two of the best areas. But the EV charging stations, the alternative fuel discussion, the utility companies are also a good, solid partner. But probably the most promising partners that we're seeing today are these hybrid models that are coming from the PE funds. The private equity funds are really able to bring together these consortium of companies. The private sector companies we mentioned play the role of a utility provider, taking the financial risk out of the hands of these cities, and really be able to help decode and understand other different components. But really understanding the changing nature of the P3 environment is going to be very critical to be able to make all of this work. In fact, if you would also look at trying to understand the P3 environment in current state, the 5G model is going to take on even more evolution, having the auctions just occurred here in the last 2 weeks. The next thing you need to do is identify the partners in your market. The partners in your market are both external and internal. Inside of a city, you may have multiple departments that really are not working together, but really should be. As an example, with that LED lighting fixture, you may have Public Works, which houses the lighting fixture. However, you may have Public Safety that has an interest in that multi-sensor node that really can identify crime, or perhaps it's an environmental issue. You want to be able to detect the humidity, or maybe it's noise pollution. But really being able to identify the partners internally as a starting point to be able to find the most valuable offering, and the more problems that you can solve, the more valuable it is not only to you, but it is valuable to the external community. The ability to be able to drive solutions into a city through a partnership model makes a lot of economic sense. Externally, identifying partners in your market. You can begin by looking at the legacy companies in your community to be able to look at the innovation partnering needs that they may have. They may find that they are trying to make an outreach into other areas, unrelated business lines seemingly. Perhaps they have a product set, though, or an innovation mentality that they're trying to extend their brand or their domain expertise into other areas, and they're seeking ways to be able to create a public-private partnership from an economic development front. The other partners that you can look at are ones that are in the more traditional areas. The traditional areas like the energy savings companies or the energy performance companies. But if you look at some of the different assets that you have available to you, also look now at the citizen assets. The citizen assets can include buildings that are owned either by the city or by the private sector companies. But the ability to be able to replace boilers, chillers, be able to put in automated control systems, the ability to be able to put solar film on windows, improve the building envelope, put solar panels on top of a rooftop, or being able to really create a much more efficient building. These are very important public-private partnership opportunities at scale. You have entire companies that are willing to be able to discharge your financial risk while improving the conditions of your community, while taking on the financial role of financing these improvements. And by the way, if you are looking at being able to create that ideal live, work, play, smart city environment, the ability to be able to create a more vibrant community with better assets really translates into economic development opportunities that makes dollars and cents. It attracts more companies, more people to move there, and workforce development is the battleground for many states. And if you have the people living in your community, that public-private partnership can have multiple dimensions of impact. So those are some of the different partners that you can look in the market. You can look at the investment capital partners. You can look at the asset partners. You can look at the utility-oriented companies. You can look at the innovation opportunities. Lastly, in every marketplace, you can also look at the academic area. The academic and research public-private partnership model is very important. Whether you're trying to commercialize a new technology with a large company, or you're trying to be able to do research with an R1 or R2 university, or you're trying to be able to identify an SBIR, STTR grant, which is an additional capital source, the ability to be able to look holistically at your marketplace is going to be very, very important. Developing a business plan is very important to this too. What does that mean? Well, you've got to be able to build local support and appoint a champion with a clear decision-making authority to be able to really develop an effective public-private partnership model. Many cities often have a chief innovation officer, but what is really a challenge is when the chief innovation officer, the procurement cycle, and then you look at the different departments all get together, everyone is very challenged on their time. But developing a business plan with the right partners internally, externally, whether it's with these large legacy technology companies, whether it's with the financiers, whether it's with consulting companies, or whether it's with the academia, being able to create a business plan that's actionable, that has local support, that has clear milestones, that has a clearly identified mission, vision, and goals to be able to solve the problems, that's key. It is literally like running a business to be able to go attract these public-private partnerships. Creating the partnership. Creating the partnership can be done in a number of ways. If you look at the formal model, sometimes you're going to have to create a third-party entity to be able to make a very strong public-private partnership. The reason for that is you may have procurement laws. You may be able to put your financial risk inside of a very specific entity, but you may also have the requirements to be able to create that third-party entity when you have multiple people with different decision-making authority and controls that have access to that partnership. On an informal basis, this can be done as little as a memorandum of understanding, a letter of intent, or really just a spirit of collaboration. The ones that we've seen work most effectively is really the hybrid. It is combining the economic development and entrepreneurship and innovation goals of a community with the cost reduction goals of modernizing infrastructure, with the smart city goals of developing infrastructure to be able to improve things, to be able to create the 5G networks, to be able to modernize things for the coming sensors and beacons and the autonomous vehicles. But the public-private partnership model and the hybrid structure that also then lastly involves the citizens is essential. Again, back to what's going on in Toronto, if you can create that dialogue with all these parties and inform the cities and inform the different communities around you and inform the companies that you're working with while involving the citizens in this co-creation model, this partnership can be very, very effective. But you've got to be able to build local support and have a demonstrated business case that makes sense. You've got to be able to have clear ROIs, and you've got to be able to make sure that it is being run as a program, which is the last piece. These public-private partnerships are very, very important to be able to select partners that you're going to be very comfortable with and have a program mentality against it. Oftentimes, these programs run for 10 to 15 to 20 years, and in some cases, they'll run even longer. But if you look at the energy savings payback of the average LED public-private partnership, your payback period is usually going to be 10 to 12 years, and then the excess 2 to 3 to 5 years on top of that is they're going to be able to fuel and fund other things that either you as a city are going to enjoy the economic benefit, or as a financier, that's where the rate of return comes in. So you've got to be able to run this as a program, being able to survive multiple administrations, being able to make sure that the innovation officer, as their mission, vision, and goals change, you've got to be able to honor the spirit of the public-private partnership to make sure that all the agreements and the spirit of performance was able to be accomplished. If you look here at this next slide, we're going to pick on a couple of these before we get really deep into a couple metrics, and then one last thing on the legislation, then opening up for questions. If you look in the upper left-hand corner, public-private partnerships that are very strong as an example in waste management. What does that mean? If you have certain type of discharge, if you are handling certain types of, perhaps it is discharge from agricultural, or maybe it's factory, but this high-strength waste stream, which can be converted through different processes, can be turned into natural gas. The public-private partnership between environmental concerns, between the city trying to lower their expenses, being able to find companies that can discharge your risk while actually making money by turning these waste streams into natural gas and selling it off in the marketplace, and being able to have the citizens involved in this public-private partnership with the understanding that the contract isn't just about financial savings, but it's also about environmental impact. This is a very strong public-private partnership opportunity. If you look at smart health as the next one, smart health to the right of the waste management piece, what does that mean? There are currently 2 public-private partnerships that are going on across the United States that are looking at aggregated data to be able to test different types of technology, to be able to look at the total population health. These companies have invested capital into these communities, and the capital has not only been used to be able to buy the software, but it's also been able to use to be able to invest in the infrastructure. Think about the antenna arrays. Think about the backhaul and small cell densification. These companies needed very good, robust signal to be able to capture the data coming off these phones, so they made a capital outlay to be able to make sure that their smart health innovation program was going to be able to get the data that they needed. Another public-private partnership model, if you look at the bottom left-hand corner here, is on the smart streetlights. If you look at what communities are doing, whether it's communities like San Diego, or if you're looking at London, or if you're looking at even here in Kansas City, the ability to be able to look at these smart streetlights as not just an LED light fixture, but really a powered apparatus that can hold multiple devices that have a public-private partnership mentality impact is really important. If you look at the electronic vehicle charging stations, what we are seeing is that this is going to take on increasing role and prominence, especially as the battery storage is increasing. Tesla as a company is one of the biggest battery storage providers here in the country for advanced technology. But there are multiple other beneficiaries in this. You've got utility companies, you've got the transmission companies, you've got the smart grid companies. Many of these companies are looking at advancing new technology or creating an opportunity at scale to be able to develop these solutions and are seeking cities to be able to create public-private partnership opportunities to be able to deploy capital, improve infrastructure, and to be able to make sure that you're able to develop the city into a modern structure that's attractive while saving money and creating a long-term partnership. If you look on the right hand of our slide here, gas and water and leak detection. In a few cities down in Florida, as an example, they are losing a lot of water, and in fact, there's one city in particular that will remain nameless. It's estimated that there's as much as 40 to 50% of water that is non-revenue water, but they don't know where the leaks are. The ability to be able to create public-private partnerships, which means that companies can buy advanced meter infrastructure, so that's automatic meter reading, so radio read meters. It's also infrastructure that allows you to identify leak detection. These public-private partnerships can really evolve into the ability, well, somebody will take the financial risk of water loss, take it off your hands, solve for infrastructure, and whether it's the increased accuracy of the water meters or it's the ability to be able to find water leaks, the cost savings alone for these public-private partnerships can really be then translated into a model to where you can discharge the problem and the risk and have it solved for in a better solution. Lastly, if you look at the upper right-hand corner in smart buildings, many of the communities that we're seeing across the country are now enjoying public-private partnerships, not only to be able to improve the quality of the building from a standpoint of energy efficiency. Boilers, chillers, building envelope have been around for a long time, but even public-private partnerships to be able to improve the lighting systems inside the building. There's a lot of studies that have shown that fluorescent lights are making people sick, and the ability to replace one building may be important to the building, but its scale becomes important to private sector partners. A city's ability to act as a convener or an aggregator to be able to replace fluorescent lighting systems at scale can create a very strong public-private partnership to where that actual cost savings benefit can be paid for by a third party, and you can actually improve the quality of the people working in that building. We've covered a lot of ground here, and so what we would like to be able to look at is the cost savings from a different lens here for smart technology impact areas. We'd ask you to look at what are your cost savings areas that you're most interested in. But it really surprises people if you look at the economic orientation for P3s, and if you look at this through the lens of who's going to be the beneficiary and who's willing to finance it to be able to obtain that benefit. So if you look at some of these, transportation and mobility, $188 billion is estimated to be able to be achieved through cost savings. And it's not just highway miles and transit for over-the-road trucking, but we're talking about in and around miles for local delivery. We're talking about vehicle miles traveled by people on their way to work and shortening commute times. We're talking about the traffic data that comes off these sensors and the ability to be able to make better sense for the real estate developers on market planning. But all of these different areas have real economic value, and in the course of identifying partners for a strong P3 model, you've got to understand or ask yourself, who are the beneficiaries? At Think Big Partners, we work with many of these beneficiaries that are looking to be able to establish these innovation or public-private partnership opportunities with these smart cities. And so if you're looking at some of these and some of these impact areas resonate with you, please let us know. We'd be happy to help you. In some cases, like in the case of the water loss, here's an interesting success indicator. So before public-private partnership in 1997 in this particular city, you had the amount of potable water that was available 24 hours a day. It was only 26% based on the entire coverage area. Now, in all fairness, in 2014, that coverage area went up, but after the public-private partnership, it went up to 99%. Why is that? They were able to take the capital investment by the public-private partnership partner and be able to infuse it into the infrastructure, and which is obviously not only good for the city, but really it's a mandate from humanity to be able to provide water to the citizens, and really this was allowing more citizens to be able to have potable water 24 hours a day. Also, the number of customers increased. Why? Because it was a combination of usable water, but also real estate development. So we've anonymized this slide based on the city, but based on increased water and the quality of the water, the city achieved tremendous growth in the years that followed. And so if you look at the growth of the city, it's about infrastructure. And back in 1997, this was a much different story than in 2014. The city growth, while it more than doubled, the amount of infrastructure and the capital investment in this case was actually triple to quadruple in certain areas. Non-revenue water, which is water loss, went down. It was cut down by almost 80%. And then lastly, the volume of water delivered to customers per day. Again, if you look at 6.3 million people, it increased exponentially, but it actually also increased, if you do the mathematics here, in a way that's not doubling. It actually did more than double. Why? Because the number of applications requiring waters, whether it's data centers, or you're looking at the type of water that's being delivered to different applications for industrial manufacturing. All of this increased, and again, this was all funded by a public-private partnership model. So we're on the second to last slide here. If you were in one of these states, you may want to take a look at what type of P3s are authorized by your state. The P3s, again, in this case, are really dictated by the formal partnerships. They're hybrids and informal partnerships too. But if you were to look at the formal ones that are discharging the risk, you may be what they call an energy performance contracting model or an ESCO. Or perhaps you're doing a P3 like Kansas City did, be able to pay for the infrastructure development from the technology backbone for smart cities. But if you look at the states, you can see what states allow what types of contracts. And if you were to go for more information, go to dbia.com. For the Design Build Institute Association. They'll have more information on this. And so as we're wrapping all this up, the last thing we'll have you look at, again, requirements for the financial engineering for public-private partnership is really P3s are not just about getting infrastructure done at somebody else's cost, but really creating the lens of how do you partner with the citizens? How do you partner with the community? How do you work with the mission, vision, and goals? And how do you solve problems? But all of these require financial engineering for a successful P3, and you've got to be able to look at who's going to pay for these P3 opportunities to be able to help you achieve your goals. And the goals, again, can be financial, social, and we'd even say political or maybe scientific, but the triple bottom line is very real. Again, as an example, understand your assets, look at your problems, develop that forward-looking holistic vision, combine that with a roadmap and a plan, treat it as a business plan, and then understand your procurement processes based on the prior slide, or we can also look at maybe ways to be able to break up a contract across different departments. The key to a good P3 model is having multiple stakeholders with very clear interests that have been demonstrated, clear ROIs, and making sure that you understand how everyone gets paid. So with that, the last couple key takeaways and considerations. In working with multiple cities over the course of the last 5 years in the smart city space, what we have found are a couple things. The first thing that we'd like to leave you with a key takeaway is that it is very important to develop a plan. Whether you are singularly focused on one specific plan or problem or have a holistic vision in the smart city space, being able to get a champion for that specific problem and make sure you're able to articulate that problem not only to leadership but also to the citizens. Being able to get citizen buy-in early on in these P3 models is going to be very essential. Another key takeaway is be able to really examine the cross-department impact of a single technology asset. Oftentimes we're finding that one department may be thinking about something like LED lighting, but things like police or fire or the sustainability or the urban planners, they all have a vested interest in the same asset. Make sure you're talking to multiple different departments. And lastly, if you are trying to achieve these, understand that there's a window and a season for these. Companies that are interested in these public-private partnerships oftentimes have capital that is limited, although it is very large, but they're looking for the ability to be able to identify communities that they can deploy the capital, really make sense of a very quick workflow, and be able to work with a good business partner that can take advantage of what they're trying to get done very quickly. It's very important to have a plan or a team in place, and clearly if you do not have a team in place, companies like the ESCO providers, the technology asset providers, or companies like Think Big Partners, we all can help play that role. So with that, we've had a number of questions roll in, Sarah. And so do you want to let us know some of the questions?
Sure. So we have a question here. First one is, of all of the options of the different vendors, we're getting solicitations every day. How do I know when a vendor is one that's worth doing, it's valuable, and does that include the ability to vet that person?
So is that a good vendor to be able to have? Here's what we know in the public-private partnership space. It's a little bit different animal than a pure play technology company. The P3 model really is a combination of financial function and the performance of that asset. So without knowing exactly who the company is that this person who typed it in is asking about. If it is a technology asset provider, you've got to be able to look at the financial mechanisms that are fueling them. You've got to look at the underlying performance of the technology that's going to be able to be used to achieve the cost savings. Or in the public-private partnership domain, if it's an innovation partnering, you've got to be able to make sure that it is not inconsistent with the mission, vision, and goals of the city or the needs of the community. So depending on if it's a financial, more formal P3, or if it's an innovation partnership, or maybe it's a social impact of entrepreneurship and innovation, you've got to really be able to make sure that it lines up in some way, shape, or form. But we can tell you that from a standpoint of technology, some companies are better than others. Some companies have very solid technology, but it could be 1 or 2 or 3 versions back from the current state of technology. Some companies have the most advanced technology. The advanced doesn't always mean that it's most expensive because they have other ways that they're trying to make money. But I will also warn the listening audience that there are some companies, and we will not share names here publicly, but some of the technologies are either not quite ready for prime time, or they're very difficult to work with, or they come with strings attached. There are caveats to some of the technology providers, depending on their partners, that may be baked into a P3 that you may be unaware of. So be careful what you're getting into, and if this person who typed this in would like to be able to email us, we'd be happy to answer that question more specifically.
Okay, I got another good one here. How do we make sure that we aren't losing any value on our behalf and not getting taken advantage of, which is something we see a lot, so that's a good one.
That's a good one. Okay, I'm going to answer that in 2 ways here, Sarah. I'm going to answer that in first understanding what you have and understanding what the market will pay for it is the beginning point. What the market will pay for isn't always what you think. Easement rights, hanging rights, pole rights, data rights, expedited permitting, all of those have financial values or economic values, I should say, to the eyes of the partner on their end. On your end, it can have economic value to you. In some of the states, as an example, in the 5G space, they've put restrictive legislation that is trying to limit the things that I mentioned, 1 or 2 of those areas, so there's a limit to what the communities can charge for. But there are other areas that you can charge what we'll call market rates, and also understanding that some of the associated assets, some of the best future opportunities are going to be related to assets that you haven't deployed yet. And so wanting to make sure you're not getting taken advantage of is both a combination of a financial function, it's a combination of what other restrictions are they going to put on it, and then understanding what the market will bear. I will say that broadly in the 5G space is a good example. There are some communities that we've seen that the average 5G, go forward installation is running a couple $100 per incident, and some communities we've seen as much as a couple $1,000s per location. There's a wide variance. What affects that variance is how much capital expenditure is going to have to be used to be able to improve the location. Some is going to be based on the scale and size of the opportunity, and some of it is going to be based on what other offsets. In some communities, these P3 partners may be wanting to contribute real technologies, but it may not make the mission, vision, and goals of a city on their first pass list. And because it is something with a retail value from the P3 partners, they will want to contribute it at retail rates. Never pay retail, make sure you pay wholesale, and make sure that what you're getting, even if it is a reduced cost, is going to be valuable to you as a city, because if not, it's going to minimize the financial productivity that you're actually receiving, and be able to make sure that you're not getting taken advantage of is make sure you know what you want, make sure that they're real, make sure you know what the market rate offers are, and make sure you know what legislation allows you to be able to charge for different things. That, think we cover it, Sarah?
That sounds good to me.
Okay.
And a reminder to anybody, as we have, we're zeroing in on the last couple minutes of this webinar, if you have any additional questions, please send them to Anna in the chat. We have our last question so far, and maybe one more after that. So in related to procurement, how do we start? Do we put out an RFP or not? And if yes, what does that look like? Which is a great question.
Sure. It really depends on how you want to look at it. If you're looking at a single asset procurement with an RFP, certainly is a traditional route that's very easy to do. One word of warning, there's an increasingly a fatigue on the private sector partners that they're seeing a lot of these RFPs or RFQs or RFIs being used as information fishing expeditions, and some of the best respondents are becoming less and less likely to apply to these traditional procurement models. And the reason why is it's a combination of the amount of time and the complexity, but it's also the historical legacy, especially in the smart city space, that there are fewer cities that are doing things. So being able to develop a relationship outside of the procurement model, we think is very important. We think it begins with trying to understand who you should talk to first, maybe developing some informal discussions. It doesn't mean that you're awarding a contract or creating unfair insight to that vendor, but really being able to make sure the vendor understands that you're serious, your timelines, and oftentimes they're even going to be able to help you identify assets if you're going down the P3 route that are of interest to them that you may not have realized that are of interest to the marketplace. As an example, solid waste streams. I never thought, Sarah, that you and I would get excited about solid waste streams and being able to convert you-know-what into, natural gas. But cities that have a problem with landfill waste or other environmental challenges, really, truly, there is gold in solid waste. And the ability to use things like anaerobic digesters and be able to have boilers to be able to reduce it down, not only is good for the water and good for the environment, but it's good economic sense too. And so being able to make sure that you follow a procurement model that is preceded, in our opinion, with developing a awareness of the marketplace, who you can maybe down select mentally, who to stay away from, and make sure that you're able to, write, the RFP relative to the current conditions of the market. Also being able to have a realistic expectation of what the market is willing to do. Some cities that we've worked in do not understand that budgets change, priorities change, and that also means then the wallet changes. And so the appetite for some of these P3 partners changes quarter by quarter or year by year, whether it is because of their corporate goals or because their wallets have gotten shrunk down. One additional thing that I would just mention here is the ability to really take a holistic assessment of all the different areas not only can streamline the procurement process, but frankly, it can also achieve better cost savings. The ability to be able to, in Kansas City, for us to coincide pulling power through fiber and putting up the poles where needed in tandem with the transit-oriented development with the streetcar line was really key. And being able to sometimes have a third-party partner talk to multiple departments and translate that into a holistic vision is very important. So the procurement process can sometimes be consolidated and made much more efficiently. Sir, do we have any more questions?
No, we don't. So I think we can go ahead and wrap up, Herb.
Okay.
Oh, wait. You know what? I think we just had one sneak in.
Okay. I'm surprised that nobody's asked a question about filling potholes with Domino's. Domino's had that P3 partnership opportunity where if you report a pothole, they'll go ahead and fill it. So they were doing their own form of public service here. So what is the question here as we're pulling this up?
I think I saw. Okay, I think we are good.
Very good. Well, again, what we would like to do is thank everyone for attending today. The last words here from Think Big Partners here in Kansas City is P3s can be very productive. There's a lot of different moving parts. If you need somebody who has some experience in developing P3s in this holistic vision in smart city space, that's what Think Big Partners does, among other things. But most importantly, when you're building that P3, cannot stress it enough, make sure that you're taking the time to understand your problems, what solutions you're potentially looking for, and then lastly, with a mission, vision, and goals before selecting partners. Because that will help you inform what partner you should select, because it's very, very key to be able to create a very strong smart city public-private partnership, because that company that you select today is going to be one that is going to, you're going to live with for the next 10 to 20 years. So with that, if you have any other questions, please email at info@thinkbigpartners.com. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining us, and we'd like to be able to send out this PowerPoint. If you have any questions, please email us too. We'll be happy to get this to you. Thank you so much.